Hi, this is the Untangling Self podcast. And today, in the spirit of Metta, I'm here with Tasshin Fogleman to record a conversation about Metta or loving kindness. Tasshin beautifully embodies this spirit of loving kindness. And I want to talk to him about what his inner experience and outer experience is like with Metta and also get his granular thoughts on the technical side of it, how it relates to the meditation path, and a bunch of other stuff, whatever naturally comes up in the conversation. And yeah, to start with, Tashin, I would love for you to talk a bit about what meta means to you in general. Why do you love it? And anything that you'd like to talk about to just get us going.
Sure. Thanks for having me, friend. Nice to be with you and speak about a topic that I care about so much. Yeah, the word metta comes from Buddhist practice. It means loving kindness. That's how it's often translated. So like friendliness or goodwill. And it's one of the four Brahma Viharas or divine abodes that are wholesome qualities of the heart that can be cultivated. I like to speak about my work in terms of the English word love more broadly, that includes the Brahma Viharas, but is not limited to them, because the same basic strategy that you can use to cultivate these positive qualities of the Brahma Viharas can also be used to cultivate other positive qualities like gratitude or forgiveness or humor. That's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, any and all positive, wholesome states or thoughts or feelings are worthy of being cultivated in the same way. So I like to use the word love to talk about this practice, and will refer to the Brahma Viharas specifically if they're relevant. So it's definitely connected to Buddhist practice and the Brahma Viharas, but it's sort of a broader view on it and just my own flavor of thinking about it and practicing it. And um, I've been practicing it myself uh, since 2018 in Sirius, and started regularly teaching it, sharing it with the world in 2021. So the last few years, a big focus of my life has been spreading this technique, sharing it with people. And there's a lot of different ways that I've done it, that which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. And could you give us a glimpse of what your inner experience looks like when you're doing meta meditation, either on a cushion or while out in the world? What does it look like for you visually or verbally in your mind or in your body?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say it starts with the heart, the energetic, emotional heart center, which is not the anatomical heart, which for most of us is on the left side of our body. Interestingly, I learned through just learning about the heart that there are some people who have a condition called dextrocardia, where the heart is on the right side of the body. But in this case, I'm referring to the emotional or energetic heart center, which is in the center of the chest, and sort of begins there and radiates outwards into sort of the face and um, the stomach and sort of the central channel. And that's where we feel emotions subjectively in our body, at least for most people. Someone listening to this might have a different experience, but most people, if they're feeling emotions, will be kind of in the face, throat, upper chest, stomach area. And um, my own experience of it is that, um, yeah, there's a warmth in my heart that's easy to tap into. It's not constant, but I can bring it up at a moment's notice and feel this love in my heart, and that flavors my experience and um, makes it warmer, more pleasant, more connected to other people, more connected to the world, happier, more resilient. And often it will be almost flavored by specific thoughts or images or intentions of, I'm speaking with you right now, so I might feel or think specific loving feelings or thoughts about you or towards you. I try to be loving with the people that are present. So right now I'm speaking with you, so it's you and me that are present in my immediate experience. And so can I feel love for myself? Can I feel love for you? And can I have wholesome, loving thoughts for myself? Can I have wholesome, loving thoughts for the other? And um, that's basically the practice: is be loving towards myself and anyone else that's present. Feel that love in my heart. Return to love if it's not present. If there's obstacles in the heart, difficult feelings, kind of clear them up so that, honor them, feel them, move through them, so that I can return to this baseline of love and well-wishing towards self and others. And um, yeah, honestly, a big part of why I focused on sharing this practice with the world is just to hold myself to that standard and that goal and that aspiration of um, having love in my heart for myself and for others. And it's simple but not easy. And um, in practice, there's a lot of times where I don't have love in my heart, or have difficult emotions that are blocking myself or something like that. And so for me, the practice is to return again and again to love in the heart. And my sense, this is just intuition based on my own experience and also from hearing other people talk about it, my sense is that, excuse me, it should become possible for this love to be automatic, where there's just always love in the heart, and that's the default state. And it begins to have this quality of radiance, where it's spatial. It's a spatial feeling, and it's occupying space. And I want it to be constant and occupying more and more space and time, directed towards more and more beings. And um, the last thing I'll say about it is I feel very humbled in a good way by this practice, in that the more I go into it, the more it's clear to me that there's always more love. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like a beginner in this practice still, because there's infinite love available, and the love that I have is finite and limited and constrained in different ways. And um, it's humbling to notice, oh, there's just way more love available than I have access to. But it's also empowering, because it makes me want to access more and more love, and to learn to love more and more deeply and in new ways. And so um, I think that's inspiring for me personally, to be like, whoa, yes, I am loving in these ways. I do embody love in these ways. I do practice love in these ways. And there's so much more that's possible. And it's been important for me to have heroes as well, of people that I feel like are extremely loving, um, who inspire me to love more in new ways or more deeply. And in fact, each person I encounter that really does this practice has ways of loving that I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could love that way, but I learned from them. And once you kind of see it, you can take it on a bit yourself. So I think each of us have a way or ways of loving that we can share with the world.
Thank you for sharing that. And that was a beautiful description of a beautiful practice. And yeah, I would love it if you can guide us through a like short 3 to 5 minutes uh, meta meditation practice, just to give listeners a glimpse, deeper glimpse into what it could look like, and also prime us for the rest of this conversation.
I love that. Let's do that. So let's get started just by getting comfortable in the body, finding a position that feels good for you. You can, of course, sit in a chair or on a cushion, but it's also okay to lie down if that feels good for you. And if you can, invite relaxation into the body, noticing where there might be tension or tightness, and almost knocking on the door of that tension and asking it, hey, could we relax? Those tight muscles may or may not be willing or able to relax, but we can invite them to do so. With a comfortable, relaxed body, bring awareness into your chest and your heart center. Simply feeling what's present in the emotional body at this time. You might not feel very much at all, in which case this is an opportunity to get acquainted with your emotional body. See if you might feel or sense something new. You might feel an emotion like sadness or anger or fear. And even though we're practicing love, that's okay. We don't make those emotions bad or try to push them away. We welcome them and really feel them. Of course, you might feel something like happiness or love in your heart. If so, you can attend to that and enjoy it. Feel free to stay with tuning to your heart. But if you'd like, you can drop in a simple sentence into your experience, telling yourself the sentence, I love myself. Saying that phrase, repeating it to yourself, and feeling how it affects your heart. How does it feel to tell yourself, I love myself? Matters of the heart, there isn't a wrong answer. There isn't a wrong experience. Simply be present with what arises for you in your heart. In a moment, we're going to return to our conversation, and you can hear us speaking if you like. I'm going to see if I can stay in my heart during this conversation. If I can stay with this love. If you'd like, you can join us. See what it's like to listen from your heart.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm still just soaking it in and coming back.
Mm.
And one of the things that happens for a lot of people that I talk to, and sometimes even for me, is there's certain subtle and not so subtle objections that come up in response to the intention to cultivate love for ourselves or for the broader world. And yeah, I just wanted to, yeah, take a time to explore some of those and get your thoughts on it. Maybe share some of my thoughts. And yeah, the first one that comes to mind is that I decided that doing this feels in some sense fake or superficial or even cringe. And yeah, has that ever happened for you? Or yeah, or your general thoughts on that?
Um, that has happened for me, and it's definitely a common experience. I think an important thing to say about this is that this style of practice is actually a different style of practice than many of the forms that people are exposed to, especially if you're exposed to sort of Western mindfulness, which a lot of folks are. That's how I started. I started out following my breath, and then later on, I did body scans. That was my practice for the first 3 or 4 years of my practice. And then after that, I did some noting. And all of those techniques are what you might call observation techniques, where you are just noticing experience and being with it without trying to change it, which is an important style of practice, but not the only style of practice. And this style of practice is what we might call cultivation, where you're intentionally creating or fabricating experiences. And that is sort of fake. It's true. It is fake. You're
Yeah,
like making it. And that's not bad. It's just different. It's like the difference between strength training and cardiovascular exercise or something like that. Like going for a run and doing kettlebells or something like that. Like they're just different. And you might like one more, you might see better results with a different one, but one isn't intrinsically better or something like that. And um, I will say that eventually with practice, it becomes less fake and more natural and more um, there. And I think there are many levels of this. I'm sure I will go deeper into this myself over the course of my life, but um, it becomes less effortful and more just uh, a natural state that you tap into with ease, where you're like, ah, yes, love in the heart, and goodwill comes easily towards others and yourself, and that sort of thing. So, um, that said, if it feels fake for someone, or they're in general with all of these objections, I think there's something valid about an objection if it arises, and I wouldn't want someone to push past whatever is real as an objection for them, and to really sit with that or honor that, or just be like, hey, like loving kindness or cultivating love isn't for me or not for me right now. That's totally fine. And I think you have to know yourself best and what you're ready for. And if there is some kind of objection or block or obstacle, then the answer isn't to just push through that and force love or something like that. And I'll say as well that that's why we started just now with feeling the heart, just feeling what's present for there. Like you have to honor what is present in your emotional body before it even begins to make sense to cultivate love specifically. And for a lot of people, there'll be a backlog of grief or anger or trauma or sadness that you have to be with in the body before it makes sense to cultivate love, before you're ready to do that. And that's just kind of how this goes.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's also possible to perceive this practice as quote unquote lovey dovey or not very technical or hardcore. And there can be a bias towards more technical or hardcore practices. But like you said, there's so much scope for depth in this practice, so much subtlety, so much nuance, so much delicacy that's possible here. And yeah, initially on its surface level, it might not even look like meditation, but yeah, there's so much possible. Like you said at the beginning, there's infinite love available, and there's always more love that we can cultivate. And what you said about objections being valid also resonates. And I also feel like I think what objections come up for a person can, if listened to, guide them towards a practice that is unique for them. For example, if yeah, wishing people well or wishing people happiness is not something that resonates, is something that brings up objection, maybe there's some other flavor of sending love that resonates. And by listening to that objection, by listening to what kind of love resonates, can help you cultivate a practice that's unique to you. That's another thing that I love about this practice. You can adapt it to your personality, like you have added a lot of your personality to it, which we'll get into it. But yeah, there's, in that sense, I feel it can be an art form. And yeah, I would love to hear about how it has been an art form for you.
Yeah, I'm reminded that another reason that I felt called to share this practice with the world is that I personally wasn't very satisfied with a lot of the instruction that I received about this particular technique. It didn't seem helpful to me personally, and I had to uh, sort of fumble a bit before I got the hang of it, and I had to make it my own and find my own way into it. And mm, in some ways, I'm trying to create the instruction that would have been helpful for me when I got started. And a lot of the instruction that I was exposed to was sort of, I mean, this is a character, but was sort of like just repeat the phrase, may all beings be happy repeatedly. Um, and nowadays, that's a phrase that I love and I'll say a lot and it will be good, but only because of finding my own way into it or um, learning about my own heart. And my sense is in general, meditation is something you have to make your own and find your own way into, and that what works for you will maybe not work for someone else, and the instructions you receive might not be the ones that actually help you directly. um, but I really feel that this is especially, or certainly the case with love, in that the phrases or images that resonate for me are not ones that any teacher ever told me or were like, try this. But that when I found them in my own, it was like, oh, that really lit the fire in my heart and brought love into my heart where I could really feel happiness. And I think there's a bit of getting to know yourself that's required where you're like, oh, what does really move me and what doesn't? And you have to go more in the direction of what does and what doesn't, and um, make it your own in that way. And that's a big part of why, I lead a guided meditation every Saturday, and I try to do something different every Saturday if I can, partly to keep it interesting for me, but also because I hope that um, one thing will click for someone that, the previous week didn't click for them, but, something new, something different will be more resonant.
Yeah, yeah. And could you give some random examples of the different ways in which you can send love out in the world, just to paint a picture of the sheer variety of what's possible in this space, the sheer space for creativity and playfulness?
Sure, sure. Well, for starters, any positive, loving thought or feeling is fair game. So that's a huge range of possibilities, and that's important to know going. It's like there's no, as long as it's positive, loving, wholesome, then it's not, then it's allowed and it's fair and is worth cultivating in this way. And so, a simple example would be a lot of times if I am wanting to cultivate love for someone, I will really feel into that relationship and what that person means to me and the history that we've shared and what I know about them and almost bring that into my awareness. And from there, it's easy to reach for loving thoughts or feelings about that person towards that person where like uh maybe they just got married and I'm wishing them well in their marriage and hoping that they have a beautiful honeymoon or that you know whatever it is, it's like that's a specific person and a specific context that you share, and it's not a generic phrase to feel into that intention. It's not just like an abstract, oh, may they be happy or something. Like it's like, oh, I really want this thing for them. I hope for this thing, and it's easy to feel into that because it's a specific person. Another example I'll give is people may have seen this animated music video that I made with Zachary Hundley that's like me shooting lasers from my hands of love. And it's like
Yeah.
there was no teacher that told me to do that, but when I started doing that, that had a whole history to me of like watching Dragon Ball Z as a kid, and then my friend Elise and I, when we were in Asia, we were traveling in Asia and we'd often see kids in these countries that would speak a language we couldn't speak, but we would just start shooting lasers at them. And so when I started doing metta practice, it was like, wait, what if I try this? And I just imagined there are lasers of love shooting out of my hands, and then I'm like shooting them at people, and that was really fun and enjoyable and enlivening in a way that worked for me, but no specific teacher had ever suggested that. So um, yeah, I think that maybe gives two clues of what this could
Yeah.
look like or something like that.
Yeah. And what also stands out for me is that in both those examples, rather than kind of doing or creating meta, you're kind of discovering or allowing it from somewhere that it already existed. Like in the first example, like you just sending love in the abstract versus feeling into that relationship. There's already love there, and then allowing it to come out and take its form. And then, yeah, and the second one is very endearing too, where, yeah, there was some energy that was already within you, and that got transmuted in this way. And yeah, I feel there's, I don't know what exactly I want to say here, but I think it's more about an opening or finding creative ways to open up what's already within you. And the flavors of love that are within us are unique to each of us. Like you said in the beginning, that each person that you meet has new ways of loving. And so, yeah, there's already ways in which you do love the people around you or feel love or even send love, and just tapping into that as a conscious deliberate practice can, yeah, just create so much happiness and joy.
Well said. Absolutely. A frame that's been useful for me to explore. This is just a way of seeing in Burbea's parlance, but like, what if the universe itself is love? And
Hmm.
what if I am love because I am part of the universe? Then how do I love from there? What does love look like from there? If in a way everything is love and I am love, and that's what we might call like a heart question or a heart inquiry, where you explore it through asking and trying, and it's not necessarily a rational intellectual question, but something you explore by doing and investigating and feeling. And that's been a fruitful direction for me of uh, yeah, like you say, less creating the love and more finding what's already there or what's available already.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. And another challenge that comes to mind is that for a lot of people, especially in the beginning, it can feel very dry or cognitive, um, especially when you're like doing the phrases or trying to send out love to other people. And what helped you take the loving feeling and create more positive feelings in the body, like, and then sustain them in a way that, yeah, feels much more pleasurable rather than just some thing that you're, yeah, going through the motions of.
It's not fun to go through the motions, and that's a stage of practice for many people. It certainly was for me. I will say that there's not necessarily harm in that.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I like to say that, even one loving thought a day is already enough, like doing this practice. And just having one loving thought, even if it's sort of like half-hearted or you don't feel love, is already a good thing. To me, it seems very clear after doing this practice a lot that those seeds of intention bear fruit. Even one loving thought is good. And it may feel dry, it may be boring or something. And I love it when it's not boring for people, when it's fun, when it really feels good. That's my hope, certainly. But it's not necessarily a bad thing if it's dry. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, or, you're broken or something, or, you're wasting your time, because a loving thought will have consequences like all actions, and um, even one loving thought. So that's one thing. I think there's a lot of ways that if you're just a little bit playful or creative about it, to spice it up right from the beginning. A big one that I always emphasize is just getting comfortable in the body. In many practices, it's important to have a really good seated meditation posture. And to my mind, that's not extremely important with this practice. You can just lie down and think loving thoughts, and feeling comfortable in the body, in my experience, makes it a lot easier for it to be enjoyable. Another one you can do is just go for a walk. Like, this is a practice you can absolutely do while walking, and it's quite nice to do while walking because, for example, like if I go to a grocery store, there's a lot of people there, and you can just send, like, every person can be a reminder to send love to them, and just be like, oh, may this person be happy, may this person be happy. That is a way you can spice it up. Another one is that I like, that I'd mention, is just looking at pictures of people. Like, you could just bring up your phone and look at pictures on your camera of people you love, and I don't know, my sense is it will be pretty easy to think loving thoughts and feel loving feelings if you bring up, your loved ones and your friends and
Mm.
your family or your pets or whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, and those are all mm, sort of breaking out of the mold of what we think meditation is, which there's this sort of just ultimate being like sitting still and, doing nothing, and following your breath and whatever. And there's reasons for that as a sort of um, stereotype or something like that. But it's okay to be playful and creative and embodied and in the world with this practice. It doesn't have to be secluded, or, you don't have to be in perfect concentration or isolation or something like that to do this practice.
Yeah. Yeah. and and for someone like me, like, who has a very scattered mind, uh, this practice has been uh, such a gift, because I don't have to do it in a linear or concentrated way. I can allow my mind to be scattered. I can allow it to go in different directions. If I end up thinking about something or someone, and I can then just, yeah, give metta to that person, and then go back to something else, or come back to what I was thinking about. And so, yeah, in that sense, like, it's also much more easier on ramp to meditation than, yeah, classic Western mindfulness stuff that you talked about. Yeah, there's no need to constantly bring your attention to something particular, and there's much more room for just error and creativity and playfulness and spontaneity, which I love about this practice. And and I think it also evolves in interesting ways, where even though it can be challenging in the beginning and feel cognitive or dry, uh, it gets really interesting as it evolves, like becomes more just like playing with some energy in the body. And I'm curious to hear about your experience, how it has evolved for you. And and I'm also specifically curious about like how it has allowed you to cultivate deep states of joy or bliss, and anything in that territory that you'd like to talk about.
Hmm. Yeah, I think something to know that's really important about this practice is that it is a very good vehicle for concentration, even though we're just talking about how you can do it sort of when you're out and about or you're moving or with a distracted mind. A happy mind is one that leads towards concentration, that is unified, that uh, is able to focus and enter deeper and deeper states. And so you are cultivating happiness and unification of mind through these techniques. And those are the conditions for good consequences with contemplative practice, where, um, for example, these pleasurable feelings in the body are a route to jhana and bliss states and going in that territory of concentration states. And mm, at least for the lighter jhanas, this is a pretty easy way to get into those. If you are able to bring up and sustain feelings of love in your heart, which you can do with some practice after doing this technique, then those make for the basis of a good object of focus for concentration states. And that's why I always say in my meditations, really enjoy it, because without clinging to trying to get into a specific state or achieve a certain attainment or something, just being present with pleasant feelings in the body, either physical or emotional, and paying attention to them and savoring them is the direct route to some of those concentration states. And so that's a pleasant way in. It's a pleasant, enjoyable way in. And so and then the concentration states, if you get in there, are a path to deeper and deeper insights as well. So this isn't separate from or removed from the broader intention of contemplative practice. It's actually very fertile ground for concentration and insight and liberation. And I'm not an expert in those things, but that is my sense, that it leads in that direction and is wholesome and worthy of cultivation if that's your intention. So yeah, that's what comes to mind from what you shared.
Yeah, thank you. That resonates. And I want to segue into how meta can also be a great complement practice to parts work and emotional work in general. And yeah, I'll just first invite you to talk about your experience with that, how it has helped you in that area.
Coming back to this analogy of movement practices, I think someone might have an intention to be, you know, an Olympic level athlete in some particular sport, but even an Olympic level athlete in a particular sport will find it useful to cross train in other domains and um, still be have a level of competency or skill in other domains. And so there are so many different kinds of practices. And in the internet age, we have the privilege of being exposed to so many of them and so many different teachers and teachings and traditions. And one of the, there's pros and cons to that, but one of the pros is that as you learn a little bit of something, even just a little bit of it, that can help with all of the other things that you do. And they're sort of mutually supportive. So I think that Metta definitely supports other practices that I've been exposed to, and that other sport practices support Metta and each other. And That's certainly the case with emotional work. I think that for many of us, we will have some kinds of blockages in our hearts or traumas that we have to feel through, and emotional work is good for accessing those, feeling those, honoring those, and hopefully resolving them. And as you resolve them, it will be easier to, for example, cultivate loving kindness. Um, but that also works in the other direction, where if you have the ability to cultivate some loving kindness, you can direct it towards your suffering or parts that are hurting or memories that are difficult or whatever it is. And that will make it easier to clear them, and that'll be easier to cultivate loving kindness. So I think if possible, it's really good to develop some fluency with these emotional processing techniques. Probably different things will work for different people. Somebody might like internal family systems, somebody might like, biomotive, somebody might like this, somebody might like that. There's a number of different methodologies out there, but kind of getting a sense of what works for you and what helps you to feel your feelings and process them and resolve them is, I think, an important adjunct to this path of love. It's a little bit tricky pedagogically or logistically, something you and I have spoken about before, because I think it's pretty easy, relatively speaking, to scale the instruction of loving kindness. That's kind of what I'm doing, but I think it's harder to scale emotional processing techniques in a certain way because it's so individual, and what comes up
Yeah.
for one person and what memories or feelings they have is different. But to whatever extent you can, working with a coach or a therapist or someone like that can really help you to surface what needs to be surfaced and feel it and honor it and resolve it, that's really important work, and something that I think will complement someone's practice of love.
Yeah. Yeah. And to narrow one thing down, like specifically, I found the lens of parts very resonant with meta practice, very complementary. And both while cultivating meta, if I am encountering hindrances, I can, if I'm feeling doubt or boredom or anger or frustration or restlessness, I can just shift my object of meta to that hindrance itself, imagining it as a part that is restless or a part that's frustrated or a part that does not want to give love. Can I just love that part? Can I allow that part? And then also, when I'm then doing parts work, when I'm trying to connect with my parts, like I said, the general skill that one develops to cultivate love, to send love towards different kind of people in different context, that then beautifully lends itself to being able to connect with different parts of you and even the difficult parts, and have this reservoir of love available within you that then allows you to welcome the most unpleasant or most uncomfortable areas and parts of your mind. And yeah, and then I think for me, it's just both the practices have converged together in a way where um, I'm often simultaneously doing both of them, and the boundaries have become blurred. So yeah, if anyone is starting out with this practice, I would highly encourage them to bring the parts lens to their meta practice, and it can also just add so much more richness and also drama to the practice, which is always fun.
There's a kind of insight that happens through this practice, maybe not in a discrete moment, but gradually over time, where, and it probably happens in different ways for different people, but um, let's say you're sending metta to your friend, for example, a friend you care about, and you realize, wow, they want to be happy and I want them to be happy. And you really feel that on a deep level, not just a head level, but a heart level. And you realize, oh, they're subject to suffering, and they, maybe they're having a difficult time, or maybe they'll get sick one day, or and I don't want them to suffer. I want them to be free from suffering. And then you sort of look around, metaphorically speaking, in your heart, and you say, wow, I'm like that too. Or this other person, this stranger that I've never met, is like that too. I want them to be happy, and I want them to be free from suffering. And um, because the insight is something like, wherever there is a being, that is true, that they are worthy of happiness or deserve happiness, and it's we want them to be free from suffering. It's and deserve here is not in a like political rights sense of logical necessity, but more like it would be good if they were happy, and it would be good if they were free from suffering. It has a kind of axiomatic quality to it, where you just see it. You're like, yeah, if there is a being, whoever they are, whether they're me or my friend or someone I've never met or even an enemy, someone who's difficult for us, it would be good if they were happy, and it would be good if they were free from suffering. We see that on a fundamental level, that if there is a being, we want them to be happy, and if there is a being, we want them to be free from suffering. And um, if that's true, that extends to all beings, including this parts view of ourselves, where, oh, if we're made up of parts, then and that's just a way of seeing, of course, but it's a useful, fruitful one. And those beings also, we would want them to be happy, and we would want them to be free of suffering. And it would be true as well for animals or plants, or if there are beings in other realms that are um, alien somewhere, or if there are entities or something who are non-material or something like that. If there is a being, then the same is true. And it follows quite naturally. It's just like parts. Okay, they also have same property, whatever they are, whatever they are. Many of us, if we do parts work, will encounter like really hairy stuff in there that's difficult and thorny and uncomfortable, or but those beings too are worthy of that same love and care and respect that any being is, on that fundamental level. On that fundamental level, it's not about liking them or finding them pleasant or something like that. It's like, oh, it would be good if they were happy. It would be good if they were free from suffering.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah. I also feel like the practice also lends itself to the cultivation of insight, of seeing into the fundamental nature of suffering itself, where uh, the moment you cultivate love for a part of you or for a being and welcome that into your heart, or just allow them to be, it brings an ease in our experience. It brings more pleasantness. The unpleasant nature of that emotion or that part of that being changes in a few moments sometimes. And and that realization is fertile ground for so much relieving of suffering that we have in different areas of our lives. And there's also something about uh, and I might not do a good job of relaying this, but Warweki talks about how cultivating this stance of love opens up the possibility of recognizing how much we are assigning roles and identities to people, and then in relationship to that, assigning roles and identities to ourselves, and then just playing out those roles without being aware of them. And a lot of those roles are defensive in nature, or lead to a lot of friction within ourselves and in our relationships. And just taking the stance of love and directing it towards someone else can help us see how much more they are than the role that we were assigning to them. For example, if you are sending metta to your father and just taking a few moments to love the person that he is, you can have the realization that he's so much more than just your father. He's a son, a husband, a friend, and he has a rich, complex history And even that kind of coming into our awareness can automatically generate so much compassion, and yeah, can lead to dropping off so much of the fight that we have with that person or with the model of that person in our minds.
Yeah, I think this practice really shifts things both in terms of perception, as you're talking about, where it can change the way we see someone, whether it's someone else or ourselves or a part of ourselves, and shift our experience of them. But it can also change the way we show up and the way we act, and also the way other people treat us. Um, a simple example that I encounter a lot is, it really seems to me that animals and babies quite like me. They
Mhm.
seem to trust me very easily, and they're like, "Ooh, who's this?" and are very warm and affectionate. And um, you know, my sense is that this practice changes the way others and the world relate to us in a really wholesome and positive way, that people feel safe with you and at ease with you and trust you and warmly towards you, and pick up on the love that's in your heart and the goodwill that's in your awareness, and that shifts the way you relate to them, that shifts the way they relate to you. And um, this is actually even pretty easy to causally explain in a way that's maybe compelling to people that might be otherwise suspicious of this, because if it does change your perception, if you're having a loving thought or feeling about someone, then that's going to change the way you act towards other people. And then that, if you act differently, that changes the way other people see you and perceive you. And then if they see you differently, then that's going to change the way they act towards you. And then that's a positive feedback loop. So, um, and that's really my lived experience, is that this does absolutely change the way I perceive people, and there's a warmth and love and care that's present, and then that naturally blossoms out into the choices I make and the actions I take, and also the way that the world responds to me. Yeah, that's very powerful. It's very powerful.
Yeah, 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 definitely resonates with my experience. And I'd love for us to touch upon uh, other Brahma Viharas a bit. You mentioned them in the very beginning, and if you could, yeah, lightly introduce them again, and especially in the context of loving kindness and yeah, anything that you would like to share in that area.
Sure. Yeah, so there's four Brahma Viharas. Loving kindness or friendliness or goodwill is the first one, but there's also compassion or karuna, sympathetic joy or mudita, and upekkha or equanimity. Compassion is the awareness of suffering and the desire that it might be resolved. Sympathetic joy is the awareness that someone else is happy and feeling this resonance of happiness for them. And then equanimity is, Shinzen would talk about it as allowing experience to be present without pushing it away or holding on to it. And so um, that's a very, very important quality of the heart, especially, yeah, really, really with all of these um, Brahmaviharas, but it's an important complement, for example, to compassion, where if you're aware of suffering, you don't want to be bowled over by that or distraught. You want to be equanimous with it, where you're not pushing it away, but you're not also like clinging on to it. And um, that's a that's tricky. That one's tricky for me personally. My sense is from talking to people that often one or the other of these will be easiest for someone, and one or the others will be hardest. And so, um, you know, com loving kindness comes relatively easy for me, and compassion has been historically a bit more difficult. It's helped me to do Tonglen. That's a way that I've personally really been able to cultivate compassion in a balanced way, where it's really connecting to that quality without being distraught or overcome by it. And Tonglen is a technique of uh, visualizing the breath in a certain way, where you're aware of the suffering, you're aware of your breath, and then you also visualize inhaling the suffering as this black, tarry filth, and then exhaling it as white, healing light. And so you're sort of transmuting the
Mm.
suffering into this wholesome intention. And that exercise has really helped me to access and cultivate compassion in a fruitful way. Yeah, and any of these qualities can be cultivated with the same basic strategy that applies to any of these. And, loving thoughts and feelings, just repeating them, staying with them, enjoying them, and they become more and more accessible to us the more we cultivate them.
Yeah, yeah. Someone on Twitter was recently talking about how Metta is also a great starting point for the other three Brahma Viharas, in the sense that you can start with Metta, and if you then bring up someone suffering to your mind, it just naturally takes the form of compassion. Or if you start with Metta and then bring up someone's joy to your mind, it naturally takes on the form of mudita, yeah, sympathetic joy for their happiness. And I feel similarly also, like if you were to direct that metta towards your own sensory experience, it can take on the form of equanimity. Um, Rob Burbia has this guided meditation somewhere, which is basically metta for phenomena, where rather than directing metta at any particular beings or parts, anything like that, you just direct it towards your own experience, what's arising. And naturally, it then just leads to a lot of deep welcoming or allowing of experience without pushing it away or without holding on to it. And yeah, just that.
Well said. That's certainly true. And these heart qualities really bleed into each other and are mutually supportive of each other. And the more you cultivate of one, the
Mhm.
easier it is to cultivate the others.
Yeah. Another topic that I have on my list here is psychedelics, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. And you also talk about it in your book. And yeah, I'd love to hear a bit about your experience, how Meta has been synergistic with psychedelics for you, and how people can, if they want, combine them in interesting synergistic ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, the first thing I'll say is, if only for my own ethical protection,
Yeah.
uh, I think it's up to each person how they want to encounter these substances and whether they choose them or not. And I wouldn't necessarily encourage someone to take psychedelics. They've been an important part of my own path, but I leave that choice to people. And I would also invite people to really be investigating what effects this particular substance has on them, and in particular, whether it's wholesome or not, and to be honest about that. I think this might be different for different people, but to some extent, we can probably agree certain substances would not be wholesome or beneficial, and then others might be incredibly wholesome for someone. And just to notice that and be honest about that if you do try these substances, and to steer in accordance with that. The substances that I've chosen to ingest are ones that um, or that the ones that I ingest repeatedly are ones that I'm like, yeah, I think this has a wholesome, positive quality for me as a net positive. But there are other substances that I don't touch because it's like, this is not a wholesome, positive thing for me. And that's important. I think two things come to mind if someone chooses to ingest these in relation to the path of love and the heart. One is there are certain substances that you might call pathogens that really give access to the heart and cultivate heart awareness. They cultivate resolution of emotions, and they also cultivate loving thoughts and feelings. Um, Someone could choose to take such substances because they wanted to explore what's present in their heart, and they wanted to specifically cultivate loving thoughts and feelings. That's a valid approach, and has been fruitful for me to investigate. The other one I'd say is that, zooming out very broadly, I find that loving kindness is a sort of protective mind state, and one that protects me from negative thoughts or negative feelings. And I don't know, I even frankly think like negative external circumstances. And if that's true, to whatever extent that's true, it's a kind of protective state that is worth entering before and during a psychedelic trip, even if it's not one of these empathogens, that even if your intention isn't specifically to cultivate love, like if you were going to go on a psychedelic journey that's, more, um, open-ended, then I think doing metta and practicing love in hours and even days before your journey is a really good idea, and something that will potentially help you either avoid difficult experiences like a bad trip, or be more resourced to work with them if they do arise. Um, yeah, so I don't know, if I ingest certain psychedelics, I like to practice metta for a few days beforehand and set aside, several hours as much as I can to do a lot of it in the days leading up to a journey, and kind of have that be that state of mind be the baseline. And I do really think that preparing the mind and the body for a journey can make it much more likely that it's not one of these sort of bad trips that you'll hear about. I think the state of mind that you're in is really important, and this will cultivate a wholesome state of mind. And then also just practical things like, again, getting comfortable in the body, and
Mm-hmm.
breathing slowly, like not breathing too fast, um, making sure that the temperature of your body is right. Like, I think a lot of times if someone has a bad trip, it's like, oh, they were hearing the sound in the background, or it was a little too warm or a little too cold, or they were just breathing a bit fast or something like that. And if you kind of change those variables objectively, then it makes it a lot easier to have a trip that's like fruitful and pleasant, and not overwhelming. And the same is true for our state of mind. And in that way, metta is sort of protects us from negative thoughts and feelings and mind states that might lead us in the direction of having a trip that's like, that was rough. So
Yeah, yeah. A slightly technical description of what you said, the same thing, is especially for classical psychedelics, which are kind of non-specific amplifiers, having cultivated a positive attractor state like metta, which is kind of self-reinforcing, where the more love you feel, the more love you're able to cultivate, that lends itself beautifully to that non-specific amplifying property of classical psychedelics. And it also then helps you, like in the moments if you get caught up in a negative attractor state where you're in a vicious thought loop which is self-reinforcing, and in that space, like if you try to fight with that thing itself, it just gets more reinforced, or just it's difficult to fight with it or come out. And that situation, if you have trained or cultivated a positive attractor state like metta, it can does not guarantee that you will be able to step out of it, but gives you something like a positive counteracting thing that can help you come out of it. And so in that sense, not just metta, but all the four Brahma Viharas land themselves beautifully to the psychedelic experience.
yeah, and if I can get just a bit woo for a second, my
Of
own
course.
subjective experience would suggest that there really are these entities or beings that are non-material but can encounter us in this realm. That may or may not be someone else's experience. They may or may not agree with us that, but that's certainly how it seems over here from my experience. And it seems to me that whenever I've ingested psychedelics, it opens you up in a certain way to these realms and makes it more accessible for beings to kind of come and hang out with you for a while. And to the extent that that's true, it's important for me to see all of these entities as fundamentally good. That's an important part of my practice, is to believe that beings are fundamentally good, but they may or may not be ones that we want to vibe with at a specific time, or who might be fruitful for us to encounter, or that we're ready for, or something like that. And that's just how I hold it personally. And I think that the state of mind of loving kindness and cultivating those thoughts and feelings is one that, on the one hand, invites in beings that might be wholesome for us to encounter, like guides or angels or devas or whatever you want to call them, that might be of support to us or be fruitful for us to have an encounter with. And then conversely, it sort of is a protective against beings that might not be fruitful for us to encounter, or that might not feel good to be around, or that we might not be ready for. And just having that intention of goodwill towards all, inviting in connections that are fruitful for us, and sort of keeping the door closed to beings that is not fruitful. That's been a very powerful frame for me with that, and one that Metta specifically sort of like draws in the good resonance and repels stuff that might not be so fruitful, and really does feel like a shield in a certain way. And how to put it? Yeah, I think when I've had bad trips in the past, it's been fruitful to look at those as being visited by beings that like I wasn't ready to encounter, or ones that didn't have intentions for me that were maybe wholesome or something like that. And since I've started cultivating metta before journeys like that, and having that intention of inviting in beings that would be wholesome for me to encounter, and sort of politely declining visits from beings that aren't present, it's been a lot more easy for me to have journeys that feel good, that are fruitful, and don't have these kinds of difficult negative experiences. And sometimes it'll really feel like, I don't know, like someone's kind of like knocking at the door and they're like, hey, can I come hang out? And I'm like, that doesn't feel good. I'm just like, could you not? And then they're like, okay, cool. This is just my own experience and worldview that may or may not match someone listening's experience or worldview, but I share it in case it's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely interesting. I also feel like generally what meta helps both in general life and also in psychedelic experiences, like allowing us to embrace intensity. And as we all know, like psychedelic experiences can be quite intense, like they dial the volume up on the intensity. And if you're not able to embrace the intensity, we then tend to fight it, and that fighting of intensity is then what tends to create the kind of experiences that people then naturally and justifiably label as bad trips.
Yes. Yes, well said.
Yeah. And yeah, and now I've saved my favorite topic for the end, which is, yeah, meta wave. And yeah, your recent meta dance party.
Hmm.
I think, yeah, that's a beautiful way of bringing more love into the world. And yeah, I just want to hear you talk about your experience with it, and yeah, how you see that evolving in the months and years to come.
Hmm. I'm so touched that you enjoy this as much as I do. um, I'm going to zoom out a bit and share a little bit about something that really matters to me quite a bit, and then I'll talk about Metta Wave in particular. But my sense is, I alluded to this earlier, but I really feel that if someone does a lot of this practice, that they start to connect to a form of love that's entirely their own, and a way that love almost wants to manifest through them, that's particular to them, and that is asking to be expressed. And so when I look at people I know who have done a lot of this practice, there's a way that they love other people and a way that they want to love the world and show up to the world that is love. It's unmistakably love, and then it's also entirely them, and it's very specific to them. And I think people who do a lot of this practice really, I'll go even as far as to say, owe it to themselves and to the world to look closely at that and ask, what is the kind of love that is proper to me? Yes, there's loving kindness in abstract, or the Brahma Viharas in abstract, but what is my flavor of love? What is the love that wants to be expressed through me? And notice that. And of course, our friends will reflect that to us. They'll share, oh, I really appreciate how you love this, love me in this way, and how you show up in this way. But it becomes clearer and clearer as time goes on, and it may also change, but to the extent that we're connected to the form of love that is our own, I think it's worth bringing that into the world and helping other people to love in that way, because it's a little bit like an invention. Once someone invents something, it's available to everyone else. And um, so it's not actually that hard, but you have to sort of show people or bring them to it first. And I mention that because in some ways this feels like the way I want to express love in the world, or one of the ways that I want to express love in the world that's particular to me. And many people, of course, have combined music and love before. That's not novel, but um, I think these metta dance parties and the idea of metta wave and the way that I'm bringing that into the world is my own, and something that I'm sharing with the world as one example of this kind of Tasshin flavored love that's particular to this being. And this is a dream that I've had for a while of, I loved practicing metta while dancing and listening to music. And that was just so enjoyable for me because the music is so good, and you could sort of move your body. There's a lot of energy in my body, and I don't like sitting still these days. I've done so much formal seated practice in my 20s that was sort of forcey and forcive, and I just won't force myself to practice in stillness anymore. And there's no forcing allowed. And so a really joyful way for me to practice is to be moving my body and be dancing and be listening to music and be in the warm sun and be in the grass or the forest or what have you. And it's so joyful and easy to practice that way, and I wanted to share that with other people. And um, I, of course, love so much dance music, and there's really wonderful dance music out there, but a lot of it was not great for the thing that I wanted to do, because um, there's a specific sound or vibe that I wanted to go for that a lot of times would almost get there, but not quite. And a simple way that this misses is, like, there's a lot of songs about love, but they're usually just about romantic love.
Mm.
And I love romantic love. I'm a big romantic. I love the ladies, but that isn't the only form of love, and that's not what this path is exclusively about. In fact, like loving kindness isn't a conditional form of love. Romantic love is a conditional form of love, one that I really care about and enjoy, but it's not the sole thing here. And so I wanted to hear music that talked about love as in this more broad way, in this more general way, that talked about the Brahma Viharas or these cultivation practices. And I started to be able to do that internally by associating certain songs or sounds with things and having an internal headcanon about this. And then I started to be able to share that with people by learning to DJ and putting samples on top of things. And most recently, I've started to produce my own music and create my own music. And that's been a dream that I've had for a while, and something I've been building up skills in over the last few years, first with DJing and um, running these dance parties, and now with music production. And thankfully, I've been really blessed to have some wonderful collaborators who have leveled me up quite a bit. And I hope to keep learning that and creating more music that's like this. And yeah, I think it's just a really joyful, beautiful, fun, pleasurable way to do this practice. There's no rule that says practice has to be painful or boring, and it can actually be fun and pleasurable. So this is the way that it's fun and pleasurable for me, and it's a real gift and blessing to share that with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And thank you for sharing your love with us.
My pleasure. If people are interested in that, I have a SoundCloud where I post the songs that I've made and also the sets that I've DJ'd, and right now we're running something like 4 Metta dance parties a year in different cities, all in the States so far. Eventually, hopefully, we'll do them internationally.
Yes.
And I've also been recently making music videos. I think at this point I've made 7 music videos over the last few years, and those are on my YouTube channel, and hope to make some more so people can watch those as well.
Awesome. And yeah, I'd also recommend checking out Tashin's book. He wrote a book titled The Path of Love about loving kindness and metta. And it touches upon a lot of the things that we talked about and more. And yeah, where does one go to check that book out?
Yes. So you can go to tashin.com/meta-book to read the book, or the other thing you can do is just go to tashin.com/love, and that has all of the different resources that I've created, including the book and guided meditations, the weekly events that I run, the sets I was mentioning. It's just all there. That's kind of the homepage of all these different resources. And my hope is that there'll be something for everybody. Some people like to read a book, some people want to listen to a guided meditation, some people would prefer to come to a live event, some people just want to hear some really good music.
Yeah.
I also make visual art that's sort of love inspired, so hopefully there's something for everybody there.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, bro. Yeah. Thank you for your gifts.
Mm. Thank you so much for witnessing them, and for this conversation. It's been really enjoyable to talk about love with you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.